Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're decoding an absolute masterpiece of ancient literature, the Syllabitikaram, but we're going to look at it through a lens that you've probably never considered before. We are examining Madhavi's Arangetram, her grand debut. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. I want you to picture the scene for a second. You've got this antique gold shimmering under the really warm kind of dancing glow of classical oil lamp lighting. But here's the thing, this wasn't just art. It was actually a highly calculated exhibition of Chola imperial power. Madhavi's performance was literally a geopolitical tool. It was this cultural arsenal perfectly designed to showcase the absolute hegemony, the vast wealth, and the technological supremacy of the Chola kingdom to the rest of the world. I mean, every single movement, every thread she wore, every sound she made was quite literally engineered for dominance.
So let's talk about this concept of acoustic engineering, or oleathirvigal. In ancient Tamil tradition, jewelry was not just decorative, not at all. It was actually highly advanced technology. Ornaments like the salambu worn on the ankles and the mekalai around the waist, they were precision rhythmic instruments. They were engineered with very specific metal purities and precisely calculated gem weights to act as acoustic tools. The dancer would actually use these instruments to command the entire tempo of the performance. They project a sound that perfectly mirrored the disciplined marches and martial movements of an imperial army. When you really start to notice this ancient technology, you realize it's basically the heartbeat of the empire.
And making these pieces? Well, that required some seriously advanced metallurgy. They used lost wax casting, which is known as cire perdu, and these incredibly sophisticated gem setting techniques, like the ruby claw setting, or nandupiri. Take the salambi on the anklet, for example. It contained these perfectly calculated metal beads called pearls, and get this, using different metals actually yielded different pitches. It was a literal pitch control mechanism built into a piece of jewelry. Then you have the mekalai, which was this waist girdle made of 32 strands of pearls, and that generated the foundational rhythmic pacing of the dance. Meanwhile, the sutti worn on the forehead was tracking these really subtle, high-frequency kinetic movements. So yeah, these weren't just pretty accessories, they were perfectly calibrated acoustic instruments worn right on the body.
All right, so that brings us to part 1, the dances of divine destruction. And these performances were all about directly modeling divine battlefield supremacy. Just imagine the stage illuminated by glowing oil lamps. The dancers are draped in this dark, rich, tightly woven Tamil silk that just absorbs the light, which really highlights the brilliant flash of the gold jewelry. Now, the first one here is the Ali Gum dance. This performance recounts the dark-hued Vishnu's destruction of Kamsa's treacherous elephant, and Madhavi recreated this brutal encounter with absolute flawless precision. The acoustic engineering here is super critical. The heavy, deliberate strikes of her silambu against the stage didn't just keep time, they were echoing the devastating, ground-shaking martial arts of the Chola heavy infantry. I mean, every single stomp was this massive, affirmative statement of crushing power, and the sati on her forehead tracked the sharp, sudden movements of evasion and striking. It basically mapped a mythological triumph directly onto state military tactics, essentially proving to everyone watching that the empire's ground forces were this unstoppable divine force.
Next up, we have the Kodakoti dance. This one portrays Lord Shiva literally burning the 3 mythological cities of the Asuras to ashes, and he does it with just absolute faultless rhythm. I want you to think about the macro textures of the meskalai here. As Madhavi spun around, this multi-layered pearl belt swung with this incredibly calculated ferocity. The pearls would crash together to mimic the crackling, unpredictable, and just entirely destructive nature of fire. The dark silk of her traditional costume would kind of blur in that oil lamp light, making the golden jewelry the absolute focal point of the destruction. The acoustic pacing of the meskalai just commanded the room. It perfectly mirrored a state power that could absolutely obliterate its enemies without missing a single beat. The empire was basically communicating its capacity for total annihilation through the perfect timing of a dancer's waist ornament. Crazy, right?
Moving right along, the third sequence is the Panduranga dance. Here, Shiva displays his terrifying form before the four-faced Brahma, dancing directly inside his war chariot. Now, the choreography for this? It demands really intense, heavy acoustic footwork that's completely grounded in advanced martial arts dances. Remember those pyrals, the metal beads inside the hollow tubes of the salambu? Well, for this dance, they were specifically chosen to produce a deep, resonant pitch. That relentless driving sound connected directly to the advancement of Chola war chariots charging across the battlefield. The golden sooty flashed with every jolt of the imaginary chariot, anchoring the whole visual spectacle. It was a straight-up, rhythmic intimidation tactic.
Madhavi was simulating the unstoppable momentum of the Empire's armored divisions, making the ground literally vibrate beneath the feet of all those foreign dignitaries in the audience.
Then comes the Malu dance. This sequence breaks down Vishnu's wrestling destruction of the 1,000-armed Asura Bana. This is pure, unadulterated hand-to-hand martial combat choreography completely encoded into art. The dancer wore tightly bound tama weaves to allow for really explosive grappling movements. And the jewelry's acoustic resonance mapped perfectly to the throws, the joint locks, and the physical strikes. The sharp chimes of the wrist ornaments actually interlocked with the deep, authoritative thuds of the salambu. It was honestly an auditory masterclass in close-quarters combat. The rhythmic pacing of the Mekalai kept time with the simulated snapping of enemy defenses. The Chola state was proving right here that their soldiers were just as lethal and just as technically perfect with their bare hands as they were with their blades.
The final dance in this destructive series is the Tudi dance. This illustrates Subramania's oceanic victory over the demon Sura, using the sea itself as a dancing stage. Imagine deep blue silk flowing around like ocean waves under the warm, classical lighting. The anklets here were engineered to create a really precise, war drum-like rhythmic tempo, replicating the exact sound of a Tudi drum. This relentless acoustic pacing, driven by that perfectly calibrated salambo, was signaling naval supremacy. And that was a massively vital component of Chola geopolitical dominance. The Suti and Mekalai moved in these undulating, wave-like rhythms to really underscore the maritime theme. The message they were broadcasting to the world was loud and clear: there is absolutely no terrain, not even the churning, unpredictable sea, where the Empire cannot claim an absolute victory.
Okay, let's pivot now to Part 2, Dances of Strategic Deception and Psychological Warfare.
Pivoting away from overwhelming destruction for a minute, we're going to look at tactical disguise. We're kicking off this section with the Kudam dance, or the pot dance. This originates from Vishnu balancing pots to rescue his grandson and Niruddha from captivity. Now, Madhavi's performance here required sheer, almost impossible physical balance. But just as importantly, it required profound acoustic restraint. The jewelry, the salambu, the mekalai, the suti was all engineered to be intentionally muted during these highly complex, acrobatic maneuvers. And that silence was completely deliberate. It demonstrated the Empire's unmatched capability for stealth, infiltration, and black operations. It basically showed that elite Chola operatives could navigate the most precarious political and physical landscapes without making a single sound, just grabbing their assets right from under the enemy's nose.
Following that stealth theme, we look at tactical misdirection with the petty dance. This one recounts Manmatha disguising himself as a eunuch to infiltrate an enemy fortress. Madhavi's movements here were entirely transformative. She's altering her physical profile beneath layers of specialized Tamil silk. The Mekalai played a super vital acoustic role here, emitting these subtle, shifting, ambiguous sounds that actively confuse the ear. This auditory illusion perfectly aided the narrative of tactical misdirection, masking the true cadence of her footsteps. It was a loud and clear message to any foreign spies sitting out there in the audience. The Empire excels at disguise, espionage, and operating flawlessly behind enemy lines. They turned deception into a formalized science.
Now the Marakal dance brings us to environmental adaptation. Here, Koravai, or Durga, crushes venomous demons who are disguised as scorpions and snakes by dancing on heavy wooden legs. The acoustic engineering required to pull this off is honestly phenomenal. The audience experienced this incredibly stark, blunt acoustic contrast between the heavy, deadened strikes of the wooden legs and the sharp, delicate, high-frequency rings of the salambo. Madhavi's costume also shifted to coarser weaves, which really reflected the rugged nature of this kind of combat. It showcased the military's ability to rapidly adapt its tools, its armor, and its tactics to neutralize unconventional threats and toxic warfare. It proved the Empire could walk right through poisoned lands and still deliver crushing rhythmic blows to its enemies.
Then we have the Pavai dance, which is an absolute masterstroke of psychological warfare. Lakshmi performs this mesmerizing, statue-like dance that completely halts an advancing enemy army through sheer awe. Just imagine the flawless, intricately woven gold filigree catching the light as Madhavi holds these impossibly still postures. The Suti rests perfectly motionless on her forehead, while the Mekalai hangs completely dead still. The total silence of the acoustic jewelry in these frozen statuesque moments was actually deafening. It paralleled a paralyzing form of psychological warfare. The state was communicating that true power sometimes lies not in striking a blow at all, but in a commanding, intimidating presence that completely breaks the enemy's will to fight before the swords are even drawn. And we wrap up this catalog of 10 dances with the Kadayam dance. Indrani disguises herself as an agricultural worker, a peasant woman at the northern gate of the enemy city.
Now, the sheer genius of this performance was how everyday, agrarian, peasant rhythms were elevated into imperial acoustic tools. Madhavi utilized the precise metal purity of her silambu to perfectly mimic the sounds of the harvest, the winnowing of grain and the working of the fields. Her Tamil silk was tied in the simple manner of a laborer. This wove the very foundation of the state's economy directly into its tactical arsenal. It was a potent reminder that the true strength of the empire didn't just lie in its army, but in its working people, mobilized as a unified rhythmic force.
So as you can see, Madhavi's Arangetram was not just a beautiful evening of entertainment. Far from it. It was a masterful geopolitical tool, heavily armed with acoustic engineering, psychological warfare, and cultural dominance. Literally every beat of her silambu was an affirmative statement of state power. Which brings us to a really crucial question I want to leave you with. If an ancient dance could encode martial arts, advanced metallurgy, and state propaganda so seamlessly into art, what hidden architectures of power exist in the media and entertainment we consume today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that thought.